All right, shalom, everybody. As I was working today, I came across a couple of verses where Yahusha is being examined by a tribunal, several of them, in fact, and he is, brought before Pilate. And again, I'm looking at terms and definitions for government and leaders and factions and all sorts of things, and it was just brought up to my mind that Yahusha was in fact tried, accused and tried, and by what jurisdiction, right? So as I brought up the verses, I found the terms very interesting, that in order to charge him, they cried out. And so we've talked about this in the past, the divine right to rule, meaning that no other earthly power can judge the individual if he has truly been anointed to govern or to rule. That ultimately, that means that the power that is greater than him, which would be his head or his covering, would be the one to determine the fate of the individual if he is in fact found guilty or innocent. But nonetheless, that in this case, in Yahusha's case, it would be El Elyon, the Most High. So we start off with Yahuchanan, or John chapter 10, 32 through 33, where Yahusha is confronting the council of the Jews. Now that would be called the Sanhedrin. And so they're challenging him. They're trying to find a reason to bring him in, all right, to arrest him. So they continue to lay traps for him, but it's not his time. So he's able to evade their trappings. And it's interesting because their traps are laid with words to trap him, to bring him into a place where he, by his own words, he's ensnared. Because again, this is how a true anointed individual, remember the case with David, when Nathan brought a hard question, a maxim before David. Nathan brought a maxim, a parable before David, and David's was then able to judge the matter, thereby judging himself. So we see this very tricky, deceptive form. It's called, later on in Greek philosophy, it would be called stasis, but we're going to look at stasis politically. But anyways, that's where we get the concept of homeostasis, right, where everything's working together. But in the form of philosophical arguing and debates, stasis was used to sort of create an environment for dispute. And so, again, we see that they are using tactics to try to get Yeshua to stumble or to speak against himself, to judge himself, which says a lot about his divine right to rule. They know that they cannot judge him. Well, listen to this. Somewhere they know that they do not have the right to judge him. So this is why later they bring him before the tribunal of Rome, because Rome is actually acting as the head of the state at the time. All right. So in this particular verse, Yahusha is confronting the council, saying, listen, I have shown you, I'm not empty. My words are not empty. My words are effective, showing you that I have power and efficacy. I have shown you many good works from the Father. For which of these do you stone me? And then they say to him, we are not stoning you for any good work, said the Sanhedrin, but for blasphemy. This is what they were looking for. Again, blasphemy, right? To speak, to judge with your own mouth, to determine your own guilt. Because you, who are a man, have declared yourself to be El, to be God. Now, after a brief discourse, if you continue to read that chapter, you'll see that Yahusha does indeed clarify after going into the discourse of gods. And then he says, I am the son of Yahuwah, right? So I am the son, I am the heir. So again, he clarifies that he is not, in fact, Yahuwah, but the son of Yahuwah. And so even though he makes clarification here, they still find fault. Even this is something that they are obviously in fear of, right? Which I think is even more so than him claiming to be El himself or Yah himself, but the fact that he's claiming to be the heir. This means something to them. So later on, some time passes and they're able to finally bring up some Trump charges against him, and they take him. Yahusha is then taken by the Sanhedrin. Remember, that means the council of priests. They take him to Caiaphas. And in other gospels, it says that he is taken to Ananias, but Ananias is Caiaphas's, I think it's father-in-law. So nonetheless, he is taken to Caiaphas, which is the high priest at that time. Ananias would have been a retired high priest. And it's there that he's charged before Caiaphas by the testimonies. And so there's a whole tribunal. There's charges laid upon him, but he is found without fault. And so two false witnesses enter in. Now, I thought that was interesting, especially in contrast to the two witnesses that will testify against the kingdoms of the earth in the book of Revelation. And so we see these two witnesses that stand against the kingdom of light. So it will be in the end when these two witnesses stand against the kingdoms of darkness. So beautiful. Anyhow, Yahusha at this time is generally quiet. He does not defend himself, and he rarely responds to the accusations until when the moment when Caiaphas demands or puts him under oath to testify if he is in fact the Mashiach. It's really the only time that he responds. He asks him, "Are you Mashiach ben Adonai?" And it's interesting because Caiaphas, well, at least in this particular testimony, it's Caiaphas is making the clarification here, not Adonai, but Ben, son of Adonai, son of the master. Are you the anointed one? Are you the one in which Yahuwah has approved? Are you the one who has the right to rule? That's really what this is about. And that's why Yahusha uses these exact words. He says, to me it has been given. You will see me seated at the right hand of power. So we know that the right hand of Yahuwah is the hand of power. It is power. And that's what this is all about. It's about the power to demonstrate the rule or the reign of a particular kingdom. It's not just about establishing the title or ascribing to yourself the title of a governor or a king or a priest or a ruler or a power in high places, but rather to have the power, the efficacy that demonstrates the kingdom at the right hand of power. And then it's then that Caiaphas rips his garments. They all rip their garments. They're, how dare you? And so they understood what this meant. So then he's charged there, but yet even Caiaphas finds no faults that's worthy of death. So they take him and they send him to Rome. It's there that the charge is placed before Pilate, and there's a charge of treason. And so it would have to be right because they recognize that the powers that they claim to be vested by, which would be the high priests, right, Caiaphas, and even Herod, they have found no fault with him, not guilty of death at least. And so then they take him to the supreme power, which would be Rome, and they charge him before Pilate, and they charge him with treason. Now, treason at that time was the crime of attempting to overthrow the government in one's country, or of attempting to kill or injure the ruler or the ruler's family. This was a capital offense punishable by death. We see again in Luke 23, verse 2, and they begin to accuse him, Yahusha, saying to Pilate, we have found this man perverting the nation and, listen to this, forbidding to give tribute to Caesar, saying of himself that he is Melech haMashiach, the anointed king. So we see that they purposefully used words such as tribute to Caesar, because we talked about this. Giving tribute was a form of worship. It was the thank offering that you gave to someone who contributed to your livelihood, okay, provided for you, or maintained your livelihood. So we see that Yahuah required tribute offerings, which was a necessary form of worship in order to keep the people thankful and reminding them that Yahuah was their benefactor, that he was the one that provided the rain and the seed for the soil, and he's the one that kept them in safety and preservation. So that tribute is a form of worship. So in this case, the tribute was the coin or the tax, which is why earlier they asked him, what shall we do? Shall we pay taxes? Shall we pay tribute in the form of taxes to Caesar? And he says, render unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar. So give back to him what belongs to him. So if he's giving you monetary, if that is why you worship him, because he is providing monetary resources, then you should worship him with the same, because this is your God, right? Mammon, money. And you're gluttonous and you're covetous and you're bloodthirsty. And so he's saying, you're willing to sell out the kingdom for money. And this is why he overturns the tables. I can go on and on, but I think you get the picture here. So they bring him before Caesar or before Pilate, and they charge him with taking the place of Caesar, assuming then that he, being the king, would require tribute, and so then to avoid giving tribute to Caesar. Now, Pilate at that time had ruled from 26 to 36 AD. He was known as the prefect. Prefect is a governor, and also in the Latin, prefectus urbi. Now, urbi is where we get the word urban, or meaning the city. So the prefect or the prefectus of the city, and in this case, he was the prefectus urbi of Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem. So he was the governor. He was assigned there as the prefect of the city and was responsible for maintaining, listen to this, Roman law and order within her provinces. So at that time, Jerusalem was in fact a province, and I'll tell you exactly how. And therefore, he acquired full criminal jurisdiction in that region. So he was also put there as a way to sort of mediate between Rome, to maintain the peace, to maintain order, to also set an example to the citizens of how to conduct themselves, how to behave. So in a way, to keep them subjugated to the sovereignty of Rome, even though Rome was not a monarchy, but nonetheless the governing or the rule of Rome. And so the administration of Rome. So again, they were there to kind of maintain order, not necessarily to govern the people, but to show them what was required to maintain that peace, diplomatic affairs, foreign affairs, all these things. And so they're there. But what's interesting is that this establishment was created through the relationship between King Herod the Great, as he first and foremost governed over the region and sold out, right? He was vested by Rome. He was a client king, and therefore Jerusalem was a client state. But when he died, he had 3 children who ended up, because of Rome distributed the kingdom, divided it into 3s. And then at that time that Yeshua or Yahusha was being tried, it was Herod Antipas, the son, one of the sons of Herod the Great. Herod Antipas, he was also known as the Tetrarch, arche meaning ruler, tetra meaning 3. So one of the 3 rulers of that region or of that province. And so he governed over Galilee. So they bring him to Pilate, right? And he's the governor, and he is stationed there in Jerusalem. Now, at that time of Yahusha's trial, Herod Antipas, the tetrarch, officially ruled Galilee and Perea as a client state of the Roman Empire. Now, in the field of international relations, a client state is a state that is economically, politically, and militarily subordinated to a more powerful controlling state. So Pilate initially examines Yahusha and finds no fault in him, and therefore he sends him away back to Herod. He realizes, wait a second, he says, aren't you a Galilean? Yahusha is indeed from Galilee, and he realizes that it's Herod Antipas who has jurisdiction over Galilee. So he's glad to send him away and say, hey, you know what? This is not within my jurisdiction. So he sends him to Herod Antipas. Now, Yahusha, so he goes from Caiaphas, Ananias, the high priest, to Pilate. Pilate sends him to Herod, the king, or at least the client king of Galilee. And even he's examined there. His trial is basically at this time adjudicated by the tribunals of Herod, Caiaphas, Ananias, as well as Pilate. Now, in Luke 23:7, he is found without fault. And at this time, Herod also says, I find no charge in him, no charge that is punishable by death. So I'm going to send him back. I don't know what to do with him. He's done nothing worthy of death. Like, I don't hear anything that's, that says he should be sentenced to death. Now, in verse 15 of Luke 23, therefore, Yahusha is ordered by Pilate. So he goes back into the hands of Pilate, and Pilate says, you know what? Again, Herod. And so it's interesting side note here. Up until that point, Herod Antipas and Pilate were at enmity with each other. But because of this situation, they became associates. They became friends. It says there in the testimony. But they become friends. And so they work together. And so they sort of confer and say, there's no fault in this guy. And so Pilate tells the people, listen, your own guy, Herod, has found no fault with him, no crime worthy of death, and neither do I. So this is a matter you need to tend to. But if it makes you happy, I will chastise him and then I will release him. But listen, it's here in verse 18. We see this in the Gospels as well, but specifically Luke, it says that in verse 18 that the people began to cry out. Now, I had mentioned this in the past that if a person was truly divine and had the right to rule, then the only way the people could find relief from a tyrant or a wicked ruler is, again, if he truly was Benai Elohim, he was a son, if he really was a son of the divine, and he was given the right to rule, then they would have to cry out to his head, to his boss, if you will, to cry out to that which is higher than him. And if he truly was a Benai, a son, then that the head or the governor of that individual, the person above that individual, would then deal with him, like David, many, 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 many times, right? David was dealt with consecutively over and over and over. So it should have been the case that they cried out to Yahuah. And if this man was a farce, if he was a liar, then they cry out to their king anyways. They cry out to their El, and they ask that their El vindicate them from this wickedness. And if he's not genuine, then he's considered an enemy of the state. So then they trust that Yahuah would then deal with the individual and preserve them, protect them from such tyranny and wickedness, right? So we see the benefit of crying out. But you notice something here. It says in verse 18, that the people, that being the Sanhedrin, cry out in one accord. They are all in one voice. This is what they cry out, saying, away with this man, give us Barabbas, as it was a custom to release a criminal unto them during the feast. Now, so it's interesting. Again, they're crying out, but who are they crying out to at this point? They're crying out. So the charges are made before the high priests, no guilt. Then they cry out to the head above them. It says a lot that they are crying out. They're recognizing and they are assuming that Yahusha is also under this dominion, right? He's under the same fetters, that he's also fettered by Rome, but he's not. This is beautiful. Now we can understand when he says to Pilate, listen, the power that you've been given over, the authority, not power, but the authority that you've been given has been given to you. Like, in other words, you're not the one that is judging me. You're not judging me. Okay. I cried out. Oh my gosh, this moves me so much. They may have cried out against him to Rome, but you have to remember he was in the garden. And he cried out, Abba, Father, this is too great for me. If there be another way, let there be. Nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. His father was going to judge him. He already knew who he was going to stand before. And he had no fear of death because he knew that he had no guilt of sin. He had not violated the constitution of his king. He had not put his head to shame, nor did he violate his brother's rights and borders. He loved even his enemies perfectly. And there was no crime that could hold him in the grave. He already knew, but it was still a burden to bear that weight, to have to stand as a man in the flesh with all of its anxieties and weaknesses before the King of Kings. What a fearful thing. It wasn't his being, his soul that was fearful or anxious, but his carnal, fleshly man, the weakness of his flesh, was terrified to stand before the judge. Praise Yah. So what do? So they cry out to Rome, a head above, right? Because again, they are vested by Rome. The true power in which they governed was the power of the flesh, the arm of the flesh. And it's interesting because Yahusha says that he will be at the right hand of power, the right hand, not the arm, but the hand. I'll talk about that another day. So now, again, they cry out, give us Barabbas. Now, Barabbas, interestingly enough, was charged and found guilty of 2 crimes, both punishable by death. The first one was sedition. And it's interesting because just recently, a couple of days ago, I had come across a word as, again, I was looking through our definitions and terms, and the word was stasis, stasis, very similar to star decisis. And so this word stasis, as I was looking it up in terms of government, is in fact found in the Bible. It's found in scripture. And in this case, bringing it all together, Barabbas, believe it or not, as he's charged with sedition, he's also charged with murder. Therefore, Pilate, understanding the weight of these charges, both sedition and murder, preferred Yahusha. And 3 times, it's interesting, 3 times he's denied by Peter, 3 times he's denied by the people. Pilate petitions for Yahusha's release. And again, they cry out. It says, but again, the people cried out, saying, crucify, crucify him. All right. Verse 23 says, despite Pilate's plea of innocence, the people continued vehemently, without relent, to cry out, and this time with a loud voice, until the voices of the chief priests prevailed. Now, again, what is he charged with? Sedition. Well, ultimately, Yahusha is also charged with causing this division. And this, in fact, is the Greek word stasis. Interesting, right? It's G4714, and in political terms means faction or civil war. Now, city-states were called polis at the time, or poli. It's where we get the word metropolitan or metropolitan. So poli, and so the poli was the city, and then a police was the enforcer of the city, the police, right? That's what we have today that does exactly that. They enforce the rules and the laws of the land. So interesting. The Greek word is stasis. And in political terms, it's faction or civil war, causing a civil war, causing a faction or division. It's important to note, to cause division, to cause the internal distress. And we know that from earlier, Yahusha responds to their charges of him casting out devils by the power of a devil. He says, look, if I am casting out Satan by the power of Satan, then I am a house divided and I will not stand. So don't be worried. So he gives us a clue there of what it is that he's actually up against. He's up against a spirit of division. He's up against something that has already caused civil war or civil distress, or a schism, which is a true faction that Yah cares about, the faction of a falling away, that causes that schism, that causes people to defect, to be tossed or scattered. And that's what wicked shepherds do, right? They scatter the sheep. So again, Barabbas is found guilty of sedition. This is the word for stasis in the Greek. The Greek and the Romans were really hand in hand responsible for creating politics. And so the fear of stasis, or this defaction, or this faction, or this civil unrest, is basically directly related to the absence of public means to police seditious factions or to deal with divisions, which might be the outcome of having political standings. So here's the distinction. This gets very interesting. So what does that mean? So the people, especially Rome and Greece at the time, the Greeks, they were very concerned with uprisings. And they thought, well, if we do not have public means to police the people, then we run the risk of people, rising up and creating these seditions and, creating internal unrest, or causing divisions from within, right? And therefore causing a house to divide. And when a house is divided, it cannot stand. So this is, again, why Pilate is present in Jerusalem. Again, it's because Rome wants to create some sort of political standing there. Well, listen to this, by their own definition, the problem is that these divisions might be the outcome of having political standing. So that's what stasis means. Ultimately, stasis, it means to stand, yes, but in the form of faction, it would mean to stand against, right? To stand for or to stand against. So either way, you take a stand, either for or against. And so they were concerned that there should be some form of policing, or some form of public means to control the political standing of the people. Okay, so that's what's happening. So we see that the true wicked people, the ones that are truly wicked, are those that are siding with the policies of Rome. They are truly there, and they're the ones that are actually causing the division, because how can you have two masters? Rome was providing financial resources, military support for Israel at the time. And so, but it was truly money that the people loved. It was the money that the rulers, the leaders at the time, they were enjoying the benefits. In fact, it says when they took Yeshua to Caiaphas, they took him to his mansion, they took him to his castle. I mean, this is a high priest, right? And they were, they had robes of luxury and homes, and they were living luxurious lives while the people were suffering and were impoverished. Okay, they were truly benefiting. This is why, again, he turns over the tables, turning his father's house, into a den of thieves. But we see that it's money. Rome represents mammon, or the money that is provided to them, and the opportunity for, a financially wealthy, successful future. And so there's the division there. There's the civil war, because while they are appearing to be servants of the Most High, tending to his needs and his capital, as his laws, his ways, his commandments, they are in fact truly devoted to Rome, truly devoted to the coin or to the dollar. That's what they're harboring within themselves. But outwardly, they are appearing to be as though they are chosen for their position. And so this is why there's distress. This is why there is this civil unrest in the land. This is why Rome has a political standing at all. It's because, again, the leaders were in bed with Rome, okay? And so Yahusha comes on the scene and they're like, oh, no, 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 no. You are not going to unemploy us. So here's the distinction between what's really going on. Now, remember, they cry out for Barabbas, give us Barabbas. And Barabbas is charged with what? Sedition and murder for causing factions, civil war because of political standing, because they have a political standing. So he had a political standing. So he caused factions and he killed a man, or he killed people or whatever. So, he came to steal, kill, and destroy, right? Ultimately. So in Matthew 23:13 through 39, it's interesting. He says, woe to you scribes. Now, this is Yahusha charging them way in advance. It says, woe to you scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You shut the kingdom of heaven in men's faces. You yourselves do not enter, nor will you let in those who wish to enter. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You shut the kingdom of heaven in men's faces. You yourself do not enter, nor will you let in those who wish to enter. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You traverse land and sea to win a single convert. And when he becomes one, you make him twice as much a son of hell as you are. Now, John 10:11-13, he says, but I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand, you see, the hireling is not the shepherd, and the sheep are not his own. When he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf pounces on them and scatters the flock. The man runs away because he is a hired servant and is unconcerned for the sheep. Now we look at Micah chapter 3, 1-4. Then I said, hear now, O leaders of Jacob, you rulers of the house of Israel, should you not know justice? You hate good and love evil. Now remember, they said, crucify, crucify Yahusha, give us Barabbas. So these are those that have been prophesied who would lead the house of Jacob, that would govern in the house of Israel. But these are the wicked scribes and Pharisees, the hypocrites. They are hirelings. Finally, in John chapter 3, 19-20, it says, and it starts off by saying, and this is the verdict. This is the verdict. So even though they brought him before all of the earthly rulers, there was no guile found in him. No guilt was placed upon him. He truly was sentenced to death as an innocent man. But there still was a court in heaven, as Yahusha cried out, and he was vindicated. We see it says here, and this is the verdict. The light has come into the world, but men loved the darkness rather than the light because their deeds were evil. So remember in Micah, it says, you hate good and love evil. They loved Barabbas. They chose Barabbas. They hated Yahusha. Why? It says here, but men loved the darkness, right? They loved their greed and their covetousness rather than the light because their deeds were evil. Everyone who does evil hates the light and does not come into the light for fear that his deeds will be exposed. 2 Corinthians 11:13-15 says, for such men are false servants, deceitful workers, masquerading as servants of truth or of Yahusha. And no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. It is not surprising then if his servants masquerade as servants of righteousness, but their end will correspond to their actions. These very ones who acquit the guilty and condemn the righteous, Proverbs 17:5, both are detestable to Yahuwah. So what does it say there in Proverbs 17:5? They are the ones who acquit the guilty and condemn the righteous. They are detestable unto Yahuah, and their end will correspond with their actions. So we see that those wicked servants who charged Yahusha with sedition bore upon them the same guilt as Barabbas. The power in which they governed was not of Yahuah, but of Rome, an earthly power, which is why they cried out to Rome for justice. Their fear was order, not chaos. They were actually creating chaos by having two masters. See, Yahusha had one, Ehad. He was bringing order to the house. Their fear was that order. That light is the or in Genesis. Or, light is order. They feared the man who claimed, who made a claim, but a claim with power, that he was vested and that this power came from on high, from the Shamayim, not from the earthly realm, but the heavenly realm. That he had the divine right to rule in their stead on earth. Yahusha is eventually given the title King of the Jews by Pilate, which is a position, listen to this, a position that posed a political threat. This was a political threat. Treason, right? King of the Jews. In the Roman Empire, a claim to be king was treason. Now, the title was placed at the head of the stake, above Yahusha, above his natural head, to which Yahusha was crucified. So interesting. What does this symbolize? Well, this symbolizes the crown of victory over death. In fact, when they placed upon his actual physical head the laurel wreath, that laurel wreath, it was not the type of crown that we see a monarchy sporting, but the laurel wreath was something that an Olympian would sport. It was made of, thorns and leaves and things like that. But it represented victory. It's also mentioned the same type of crown given to those who overcome. They too will receive this crown of victory. But again, this is what's placed upon his head. But above him is the acronym INRI, which in the Latin stands for the name and title of Yahusha, King of the Jews. Now, of course, the Latin not using the letter J, but I, Jesus, which would be for the I, Nazarenus, which would be the N, Rexus or Rex for our King, and then Judaeorum, which would be for the Judeans or the Jews or Judah. So I thought that was interesting. And again, this is the title that is above him, right? What does that represent? Altogether, victory over death. So what is the title? What is the crowning glory that rests above him? The power that is greater than the natural man is life. Life. He conquered death, and they crowned him as the victor. Hallelujah.